So in the previous video, we have seen how to implement the delete user functionality. There is one improvement we can make here. So if you see, we are passing the entire object, user object, and inside this delete confirmation model where we are using this user, we are just using for the user dot name. We are not using it anywhere else. So it's not good to pass this entire user object when it's not required. So for instead of passing the entire object, we can just pass the user name as a prop. So I will change it here, username, and username will be of type string here. Now here directly we can use the username. This is always a good practice. So in any component, what data you need, only you pass that data, don't pass extra information. So otherwise you will always need to find a way to get that entire user object. So here user to delete dot, I can use the name proper. So now this username we are passing as a prop. Then this string or undefined is not assignable. So here we can add or we can assign an empty value. So if it exists, then it will be returned, otherwise empty will be. Because this optional chaining always returns undefined if it does not exist. So user to delete might be null initially. You can see its default value is null. So on page load or component load, this value is null. And we are saying that it's always a string. So that's how we can fix this TypeScript error. So now let's verify this. So if I refresh and click on Henry delete user, you can see the user is deleted and we get the toast notification. So for every component, only the required information you need to pass. That's always a good practice. And you might ask why we need this user to delete. User to delete is the entire object. We can get that ID of that particular user or just name of that user. So where we are setting this set user to delete, here we are setting. So instead of setting the entire user object, we can directly pass user or directly get the user dot name. You can do that. That is not an issue. But why we are setting you getting the entire object? So in later, if you want to get that any other information of that user, then you need to change your entire code. So instead of changing the entire code later, it's always good to store that entire user object in a state, and any information later if you want to display some more information of that particular user in the delete model, then you can use that. So from the future point of view, it's always good to store the entire object instead of storing the name of that particular user. Now that is so one more important thing. Now we are done with the delete functionality. Let's work on the edit functionality. We have this, if you go to app.tsx, we have this edit route /edit/id. And once we click on that or navigate to that route, we go to edit user. So again, in edit user, we are displaying the user form with isEdit prop, which is true by default. So let's add the redirection on this particular edit link. So user list, and where is our edit link? Here. So we have this edit button. So on click of this, we'll redirect user to that particular edit component. So we'll use template literal dollar of slash, or let's say slash edit slash id. So whatever property we have, not here inside app slash edit slash id of that particular user. So here I can say dollar of user dot id. So this is the user and user dot id. So this should be navigate. So now when we click on that edit button, we'll be redirected to edit route. So let's try it. So when I click on this edit for Sophia, we can see we are redirected to /edit/tools. Let's click on edit for this Olivia. You can see we are redirected to /edit/. Now in edit mode, if we come here for the editing user, we should pre-populate all the information of that particular user. So how to do that? So inside the edit form, user form, we can identify the information. So how to get this particular ID that is coming, which is dynamic. So it can be 2, it can be 3. So based on that, we want to get the information of that particular user. We already have list of users. So instead of writing a simple separate function, you can do that inside the store itself. So inside the store, we already have list of users. So let's add a new function here or action we can call get user by ID. And it will get an ID. Here actually we don't need this type. So it will receive that ID and we can get that individual user from this particular array. So let's return get dot users dot find for individual user. If user dot ID matches with the ID that we are passing, then we'll return this. Let's add comma here. So now what we are doing, we are getting this users property and we are using find method. So find method returns the individual object and filter returns the entire array. So whenever the ID matches, whatever ID we are passing, you will return that object. Also, it's important to know that find method returns undefined when it does not find that particular element. So here, if you see here, we are getting error. Parameter ID has implicitly type any, because we need to define this particular action in the types. So here ID, which is of type string, and it returns what it does not return void. So here we are returning that individual user, and it can be undefined. So find returns undefined if it does not match any of the ID. So here I can do or undefined. So now we can see we don't have any error. So always think what it returns. So it always returns user, that is not correct. If there is no matching ID with that particular ID, you will get undefined as the result. It's always good to specify that undefined also. Now this get user by ID, it will return that, and now inside the form, we can, let's first get that ID which user we are passing. So this ID, how can we get? We can use param soak from React. So this will give you that particular ID. We can print this if you want. So let's print it, and we can see if it's coming. So inside the console, if I refresh, you can see ID 3 is printed. If I change it to 5, you can see we get the correct ID. Now we want to call that function. So let's duplicate this. And what was the name of that particular function? Get user by ID. So we can just call this. Here we can check if const existing user. If ID exists, then will you call that get user by ID by passing that ID. And what if user does not exist? In that case, it will be null. Now we can print this user, existing user. Let me delete this right. So if I refresh, you can see we correctly get that user with ID 5. So this is a 5 user. If I use 2, you can see you get the second user, Sophia. If I use 1, so that's why this undefined is important. So to indicate that it can be undefined. So let's now click on this Liam Johnson, click on edit. You can see we are redirected to third user and we correctly see this information. So any user you can click on edit, let's say Eva, and you can see that information. Now we just need to pre-populate this information. So how do we pre-populate? So let me close all of the other files. So to pre-populate, we have this use form, and here we can use default value. So for default values, you need to give the properties or names. So inside the default values, let's say I want to pre-populate state. So I can give state information, state equal to, let's say, New York. So if I save this and refresh, you can see state New York is automatically properly. If I want to add a phone, let's say, if I want to pre-populate, refresh it, you can see you get this phone number. So whatever property you want to pre-populate, so each of the input field, we have given register function. This unique name exactly matches with these names. So you have to pre-populate, you need to use the exact same names and give the value. So we already have this existing user. But if you see the existing user, it has a location property. We don't have location property here. We have city, state, street number, street name separately. So we want to get these properties manually and we want to set this data. So let's do that. So instead of manually hard coding, we can check if existing user exists. So let's use the name property. So we have name, email, phone. So name will come from existing user dot name. Phone will come from existing user dot phone. Name, phone, email, city, state. Email, city, state. So city and state does not exist on the direct property. You can see we are immediately getting this error. So that's why the TypeScript is important. So immediately it identifies that there is no city property directly on existing user. It is on the location property. So you need to use location dot city, and this will be location dot state. You can see now we don't have any errors. Name, email, city, state, street number, and street name. So street number will come from street dot number. So let's use optional chaining here. This will be street dot name and this will be street dot number. So if I check, you can see we are getting here a type number or undefined is not assignable to string or undefined. So street number, if you check the user array, number is of type number, it's not a string. So we need to convert this into string. And there are various ways of converting to string. You can just append it like, or you can use dot to string method also. And street number is optional also. So if it does not exist, we can assign an empty value. So if you check the street number, this is optional field. We don't always provide. So we can add or operator and here we can say empty value. If it's there, we'll use that. If it does not exist, we'll not use. So if I refresh here, you can see we correctly pre-populate all the information. Let me click and go back to James Anderson. Click at it. You can see all the information is correctly pre-populated. But what if we go to the add user function? So if I click on add new user button, we can see existing user is null and we don't see any information. So what if existing user is null here? So this will come as undefined. Name will be undefined, email, everything will be undefined, which is not good. So this is working because it's empty. So by default, React does not display undefined. So we don't see anything. But it's not good to display undefined or set undefined to individual input value. So what we can do, here we can check if existing user exists, then use this object, otherwise use undefined. Now this is also working. So this is add case, we don't see any user. Now click on edit and we can see the information. So why we have given it undefined and not null? If I use null here, what will happen? You can see we are getting error. So here type null is not assignable this type or undefined. So this default value by default accepts undefined if you don't provide. So instead of null, we need to provide undefined. Now we don't have any error. Now let's work on the update functionality. So we are done with setting the initial value. So when I click on edit, we are getting this value. Now let's work on the update part. So how do we update any of the users? So we have this users list and we want to update any of the fields. So user enters update city or state or whatever value you want to update. So let me show you how we can update. So before actually writing code, it's always good to see how we can update. So let's say I have user equal to name Mike and let's say age 50 or 40. So I want to update this particular user. So how do we update? We'll create a new object, spread out all the properties of user. So it's exactly same. Now you can see it's exactly same. But in addition to that, we can specify the new value for any of the already existing properties. So let's say I want to update name to Jerry. So I can say name Jerry. Now you can see name Jerry is updated, age remains 80. You can also update age also. So I can say age colon, let's say 70. Now you can see you get a new object named Jerry and age 70. You can also add new property which does not exist. So that we are not using here, but still if you want to add, so let's say this is user. So I will spread out this and I can add salary. So let's say this. So now you can see you get a new object. So if a particular property already exists, it will be overridden with new value. If it does not exist, it will be created. Here, one thing you need to remember that always spread first if you want to update. So never do it like this. So don't spread it later. So like this, user. This is wrong. So what will happen is you are adding these values first and then you are spreading out. What is this mean of spreading out? This spreading out means you are just adding all these properties as it. So what happening is now this value name Mike will override this name Jerry. So you are actually keeping it the original user as it is. So if I use this, you can see name remains Mike, age 40 and salary 50,000. So you are not updating. So whatever property value comes later will override the previous. So always spread out first and then add the values. So here, let's do that. So inside the store, we have this update user action. So what we need to update? So we have this users array. For updating that user, we need a ID of that particular user. So we can find out the individual object matching that ID. As well as we need all the properties of this particular updated user. So whatever user is updating, all these values we need. So these are already coming inside the form. So this, if you see on submit, we have this user object which has all the required values which user has entered. We just need that ID and this user to pass to that particular function. So Let's make this function accept ID and I can say updated user. So now we need to define this updated user here. So ID, which is of type string, and updated user, it will be of type user. Now here I can set the users property. Now how to update? So this is users array. So I want to update. I want to first find out the particular object matching with ID, and then I want to update. So we can use the map method. So I can use get users dot map for individual user. I can check if user dot ID is equal to ID, which we are passing as a parameter. Then what I will do, I will return a new object. Why we are returning new object? Because each individual property is object. So you need to remember each individual property. If it's a string, you need to return string. If it's a number, you need to return number. So this is an array, and each individual property is an object. So each individual value is an object. So you need to return an object itself. So I will spread out the already existing user properties, and I will spread out this updated user property. Now if you see, and we also need to add else condition. So this is for matching, but if there is no match, we need to return the user as it is. Now you can see this is how you can do it. So now let's try this out. So we can call this update user from here. So let's take this action, and here we can call it. So here for the update user, we can pass two parameters. One is the two arguments, one is ID, and second is the user actually. Here we can see we are getting an argument of type string or undefined is not assignable. So ID can be undefined because this is coming as a parameter. So what we can do is we can add a condition here. If ID exists, then only call this. So save this, and now we can see we don't have any error. So if ID exists, then we are passing. We need to check this condition because ID can be null, and inside this particular store what we have defined update user is a string, it's not undefined. If you add undefined, then you don't need to add that extra condition, but this is not good, like adding undefined unnecessary. So it's always good to add if condition here, and that's how you can update. So here once it's updated, we can also display toast notification. So here we are not displaying toast notification, so let's add that toast here also. React toastify. Here I can say user is added successfully. So this was previous one. So before navigating, make sure you add that toast. And here after updating, user is updated successfully. Now let's try it out. So if I refresh, and let's go back to the previous page. So let's say I want to update this Olivia. So I click on Olivia, you can see all the information. I can say updated, let's say 33255, Miami. So I'll update all the values. Street number will be empty, Florida. So we can check if everything is getting updated or not. So I'll click on update user. You can see user is updated, but we need to redirect user to the dashboard page. So let's do that. So we'll redirect user to dashboard. That was the missing thing. Now when I click on update user, you can see where user is updated and we are redirected. So you can see everything is updated. So 55 S is added, updated, S is added here, everywhere S is added. You can click on edit to see that updated value. So let's revert it and see if it works. So let's remove this and add it here. Click on update user. You can see user is updated. So you can see we are back with the original data. So this is how you can update individual record of that particular user from that array. So let me show you again. So here you need to use the map method because in map you will get individual user which we can compare. If it matching, then we are spreading out the original properties. Make sure it's not like this. So it should be first user, original user property, and then the updated values that you are getting. And if it does not match, you can return this user as it is. So this user as it is, not updated user. So actual users array, you are looping over that. So you need to return that user as it is. So here inside users, let's say I am updating this particular property. So ID will be 2 and whatever values, all these values will be coming as it is. This object will be the user object which we want to keep as it is. So all the properties should be as it is. So if user don't update any of the property, let's say he don't update street number, I don't want to override that value. That's why this first spreading is important, and then you are adding the updated value. And you can also add here else like this. But this is redundant, it's not required, because if this condition matches, you are always returning from this particular function, so you don't need else here. So by default, if it does not match here, it will always come here and it will return. So it's good to have, don't add that else condition. So that's how you can update any of the user from this user side.